Okay, we're going to be looking at urban growth and immigration. I'm used to saying immigration and urban growth, but we'll keep it in the same order as those topics appear in the supplements, and together they will conclude the lecture coverage for Unit 1. Remember that the Exam 1, which is over the first lecture unit, is next week. So, and that's over the first 3 chapters in the supplements, to wit, Defeat of the Plains Indians and Settlement of the Interior West, Chapter 1, America and the Gilded Age, which is a whole mixed bag of a bunch of different topics, and politics and political issues in the late 19th century. I'll not be doing a lecture video over that part, but there will be multiple choice questions from that on the exam. Okay? In case there's any remaining confusion, when you take the chapter quizzes online, those are over chapters in U.S. and narrative history. That's the regular textbook. What we're doing here, this is meant to supplement or go along with, complement you might say, the chapters in U.S. History 2 supplements, the supplements book. Those are tested on the major exams. Okay. By the way, this is not even close to the same voice I would use if I were talking to you in a classroom. So it's just, I'm kind of here's the screen 15 inches away, and it's like I'm talking to a person instead of a room full. I'm not sure I could use that voice right now. Excuse me. Might help a little. Okay. Meant to get these videos up yesterday. I didn't really have a good day yesterday, so we're going to shoot for today. I'm not sure yet whether I'll post them under the week of September 14th or the week of September 21st. Okay, what did I say? Urban growth and immigration. The word urban is a very old word, straight from the Latin, and it means all relating to cities. So we're looking at urban growth in the 19th century, and pretty much since the United States has existed, because we'll see that our major cities in the Northeast experienced explosive population growth in the second half of the 19th century and well into the 20th. Okay, just to put it on in perspective on the timeline, every 10 years we count the people. It's called the United States Census. And some people, want to kick out the census takers, saying it's unconstitutional. Well, no, it's mandated in the main body of the Constitution, and congressional representation is based on it. But to get back to my main point here, the first census took place in the year 1790. And they count the people and report on the populations of states and towns and counties and such as that. And they collect other information as well. They have from the start. Now they've got to the point where it's not so much about how many people there are as what kind of demographic information they've piled up. But as of 1790, the census reported that about 5%, numbers are rounded off, about 5% of Americans lived in cities. How many people did it take to make a city? Well, in 1790, that was 5,000. Okay, today that's a small town. 1790 was a city, and it would have been by 1790 standards. The definition of a city was not updated until the 1960 census, believe it or not. That's to keep the percentages consistently comparable. Okay, fast forward 70 years. In 1860, the census reports that 20% of all Americans live in cities. 40 years after that, 40% of all Americans lived in cities as of 1900. So the percentage doubled. 1920 is regarded, it's 100 years ago, regarded as one of the most significant censuses of all of our history, because for the first time, just a hair over 50% of all Americans lived in cities as then defined. Now, that doesn't mean that the raw scores, the raw numbers reflect that directly. Okay, so because there were 40% is 40% in 1900 and only 20% in 1860, does that mean there were twice as many? No, way more than that. you have to know how many people it's a percent of, and that is a moving target as well. The 1790 census counted roughly 3.9 million Americans. Since one small state hadn't endorsed the Constitution yet, I'm not sure they counted Rhode Island, but don't think they weigh a lot in the balance. Sorry, guys. So that's 3.9%. Pardon me, that's 5% of 3.9 million people. And most states have more people than that now. Okay, 1860, that's going to be 20% of 32 million people. We had expanded from just under 4 million to 32 million. That's 8 times as many people in 1860 as in 1920 living in the country at large. 1900, we're up to 75 million people, so it's 40% of 75 million. Now think about that. In 4 decades, that's just under 2 generations, our population at large, not just cities but the whole country, expanded from 32 million to 75 million, 2.5 times almost as many. 1900, for the first time, there are roughly 100 million Americans. In class, I nearly always just stop and ask for a show of hands of whether people think that our population today, that the United States ranks particularly high in population among the nations, and most people don't think it does because it's kind of beat down. The United States is the 3rd most populous country in the world. India and China are both far ahead of us. Very few are that close behind us. So we have twice as many people as the entire Arab world. Okay. So cities are growing at an explosive rate in the late 19th century. And that's going to cause them a lot of problems, and they made some headway against 1 or 2 of these, but for the most part, it's not a pretty picture. If you were to travel through time and approach an American city, a big city in the mid to late 19th or even early 20th centuries, the first thing you would notice would be the stench. Cities stank. Why is that? Because they hadn't yet invented sewer systems or effective waste disposal systems. And you have huge numbers of people crammed in together, and you can figure out the result. One thing about it, though, I'm not a biologist, but I'm told that we have special cells inside our nasal passages called olfactory sensors. That's what enables us to detect smells. A human has about 50,000 olfactory sensors. A dog, by the way, has about 20 million. But the point here is our sense of smell will shut down in 5 to 10 minutes. You can only perceive a smell for about 5 to 10 minutes unless it's just overpowering. So the people at the time, they didn't notice it. Trust me, they didn't notice it. If they'd gone out in the country where the air was fresh, they would have thought that. They would have thought that was funny. That smelled strange. So leading up to this explosive growth, urban historians describe American cities prior to the late 19th century as walking cities. Why? Because everything had to be within walking distance of everything else. Okay? Because they did not have efficient mass transit or anything approaching that. If you had some change in your pocket, you could ride a horse-drawn vehicle called a hackney. It would be the equivalent of a taxi or maybe an Uber car today. It takes a little bit of money to do that. But as far as moving large numbers of people, they're just going to have to walk. As far as owning horses, there is a big horse population. We'll come back to that. But they cost a lot of money and they eat a lot of food. So that's pretty much upper class stuff to own horses or even to keep them in a public stable or to rent them. You can do that. So you got all these people crammed in together. So the cities are growing too fast for things to keep up. They have difficulty supplying drinking water to all of this many people. And it's constantly expanding. It's a moving target. Waste disposal. They try, but that's just not going to work out well either. What time is it? Okay, not too bad. Um, Police protection, fire protection, code enforcement. They had building codes, but buildings are being built too fast for the code inspectors to keep up, and they, like the policemen and the firemen, are underpaid. So you slip them a buck or two, and they'll look the other way. The police tended to be, sadly, quite corrupt in those days, and the cities were not organized in a way that could keep track of that, keep up with it, because those cities, and to some extent today, they're politically subdivided into wards. And there was a time when each ward might have its own fire department. That's going to be dreadfully inefficient, and sometimes the firemen would demand that you pay them before they put your fire out. So, problem. Okay? Overcrowding is a problem because people are moving in. When we get to immigration, you'll find that the cities in the Northeast are on the receiving end of just a flood of immigrants, largely from Southern and Eastern Europe, where they're going to live. So among the buildings being built as quickly as possible, with scant appreciation for the outdated building codes, were buildings known as tenements. Originally, that just meant a building designed to be a multifamily building with multiple apartments. It soon enough came to connote a slum, and the most common format of a tenement was called a dumbbell tenement. Not because you had to be a dumbbell to live there, it did help though, but because of basically the shape of the floor plan. Now these buildings would be 3, maybe 4 stories tall, but they're long and narrow. One end fronts on the street, the back end fronts on the alley. They'll have windows in the front, windows in the back, because air conditioning is way in the future. And there'd be a stairway in the middle, probably cramped and too small, and the building plan will be inset a little bit, so that looking down it looks like a dumbbell, vaguely at least. And there'll be windows on these insets, and since the buildings are built wall to wall, they're not freestanding, one abuts on the next. These windows opened into an air shaft, which is intended to improve air circulation. Whether it did that or not, it is certain that if that thing catches fire, it's gone pretty quick, because the air shaft helped with that. So you'd usually have an apartment in the front and an apartment on the back on the same floors. Rarely would you find a single family living in one of those apartments. Okay, they're going to be, to afford what it costs to live there, they're going to have to take in other people to help pay. So there could be 2 families, 3, maybe even 4 growing families in living space designed for 1. It goes without saying that there can be nothing resembling privacy. And water. You need water all the time. You drink it, cook with it. If we're familiar with the concept, we might even bathe in it. But remember, no privacy. So I'm going to connect this back to the tenements here in a second. New York City in the 1840s became the first city to pipe water in from upstate. Until then, there were hand-dug wells. You just go out in the well behind the whatever place you live in, let the bucket down, draw it up, there you go. Along with that, not only horses, people kept milk cows, they kept chickens, they kept pigs and so forth in the city. Okay, well, once they start piping in water in the 1840s, and they're still using some of that plumbing down there, you would go, instead of to a hand-dug well, you'd go to a public street hydrant. Fill up your buckets, lug them back up to your 3rd or 4th floor apartment. Given the lack of privacy, how often would you take a bath? Let's just say you're not likely to be familiar with the concept. That extends to washing your hands. All right? Now, since they don't have piped in running water, what else do they not have? I'll leave that one for the next video. You can figure it out.